Hello guys. Today I'm going to show you a very extreme revenge manhwa story. A boy was sealed in crystals and buried in the depths of the abyss, but he didn't die. Instead, he kept dying and coming back to life and dying again. It turns out he has awakened his superpower, regeneration. No matter what kind of injuries he suffers, he can always recover, but the pain of the healing process is worse than death. Now, the school bully has sealed him with crystal coffin in the darkness of the earth. The boy dies, then comes back to life, then dies of suffocation, but he suffers extreme pain from self-healing all the time. Just as he was losing hope, he remembered his mother, who was beaten into a serious state by the school bully. All the grief and anger in the world have been turned into power. He keeps pounding his fists into the hard crystals. So I hope you will love this amazing story. Let's get started. 10 years ago, gates abruptly opened up all over the world. Through these gates, monsters started pouring out. Monstrous beasts, humanoid devils, and even ghostly dragons. Thankfully, on the human side, awakened people started appearing. These are the individuals who began exhibiting supernatural powers, whether it be magic, martial arts, or other superhuman abilities. These awakened people became the hunters who hunted down the monsters. But for our protagonist, this doesn't matter. A young student named Jihyoung is just minding his own business when a large block of crystal slams into his face, knocking him back into the desks and chairs of the classroom. Blood starts pouring out from Jihyoung's mouth and head, staining the floor. 3 other students are standing over him. A brown-haired student smirking down at him called Thor, one chewing bubblegum called Sandman, and a white-haired student leading them with a crystal levitating before his arm called Taesu. Taesu calls Jihyoung a worm and orders him to squirm around. In this awakened specialization high school, Jihyoung is just a loser. Jihyoung's awakened ability is to regenerate, a skill so powerful that it's supposed to be an S-rank ability. Unluckily for Jihyoung, his version of regeneration is just downright undesirable. Anytime he has to regenerate, it hurts like hell. Jihyoung screams and writhes on the ground as his body tries to repair the damage to his cracked skull. Meanwhile, the bullies attack and laugh at him as he flails around from the pain of his healing. There isn't even any proof of the bullying left once he's healed. Thus, he has no choice but to just sit at his desk and endure their bullying. The authorities, including the teachers and the police, cannot do anything. In fact, they won't do anything. Why? Well, as Class A awakened individuals with strong powers, they receive special treatment from the government. His 3 bullies, with their powers over crystals, electricity, and earth, are all considered S-class individuals. After school, Jihyoung heads back home to the little shop in front of their house. His mom greets him warmly and gives him some food. His mom is the only reason he's still going to the awakened specialization high school despite all his bullying. His dad died when he was 5, leaving his mom all alone to handle their failing restaurant and provide for their family's needs. That's why, even when his mom asks him how school is, he has to lie, smile, and assure her that he's doing great. Once he graduates, he can finally become a hunter and get his mom to retire. He should be able to become a C-rank hunter with his ability. His income will be small, but at least they'll be able to live somewhere better. Then he and his mom can finally be happy. It was the 15th of the month, the date of his mom's birthday. It was also the day everything in Jihyoung's life came crashing down. Jihyoung is in shock while he stares at his mother's unconscious body in the hospital. She was on oxygen support and neck brace supported her neck, and bandages were wrapped all over her body. He couldn't even see her face because of the dressing on her head. The bullies in his school had beaten his mom into a death state. A government official tries to explain to Jihyoung that it was an accident, but Jihyoung knows it was no accident. They coincidentally came to their small restaurant, where Jihyoung's mom served them. Seeing the woman's youthful appearance, Taesu grabbed his mom's arm and tried to hit on her. He tried to flirt with her and showed her that he could even create diamonds. But Jihyoung's mom just pulled back her arm and rejected him. Unfortunately, she accidentally swiped Taesu's phone from the table, causing it to fall to the ground where its screen cracked. Mom hurriedly picked up the phone, apologized, and even offered to pay for the phone, but Taesu's power went out of control due to rage, and crystals erupted from the ground, piercing his mom into the air. It was just an accident, the official said. It was a coincidence that they went to their restaurant, and Taesu's power went out of control. But Jihyoung knows better. He knows that the bully's power didn't go berserk. Blood starts flowing down Jihyoung's face as it contorts in anger. He grits his teeth so hard that they crack, shatter, and fall on the floor in pieces. He grabs his neck and starts tearing through his skin, his rage flowing out of him in vicious waves. On the floor, splattered from where it had been dropped, his mom's birthday cake gets bathed in his blood. Meanwhile, in the mountains on the outskirts of the city, the three bullies are hanging out after school and playing with their powers. Thor worries if it's really okay that they sent an innocent woman to the hospital, but Taesu assures him that it's fine. After all, they're young enough to be protected by the law, and they're also awakened individuals with special privileges. On top of that, when Thor still expresses his worry, Taesu glares at him and reminds him that it's not his first time beating someone up. From a distance, a voice suddenly asks them why they did it. The unknown figure angrily marches toward them, and they finally recognize him as Jihyoung. Meanwhile, his eyes flash in anger, and he screams again at the bullies, demanding to know why they hurt his mom. Taesu's face brightens as he realizes who Jihyoung is talking about, and he casually compliments Jihyoung's mom for being young. Meanwhile, tears and snot flow down Jihyoung's face, which is still radiating with anger. Jihyoung charges toward them. Taesu just lifts up his hand and sends a crystal spear through Jihyoung's chest. Jihyoung grabs the spear with both hands and pulls it out, causing copious amounts of blood to explode everywhere. The hole in his chest slowly heals while he writhes in pain as his abilities work. He cursed at the bullies and was about to charge again when he noticed that Taesu had created hundreds more crystal spears levitating all around them. With a flick of his finger, Taesu sent the spears crashing down on Jihyoung. Despite being pincushioned by the spears, Jihyoung's rage still wouldn't calm down, and he crawled toward the bullies. The bully with Taesu's power smiled at Jihyoung's persistence and commanded one of his buddies, the brown-haired student nicknamed Thor, to attack Jihyoung. Thor's eyelashes fluttered, and a bolt of lightning descended from the heavens, striking Jihyoung where he stood. Jihyoung fell back to his knees, smoking from the attack and bathing the ground with his blood. The bullies walked beside Jihyoung and were about to leave, but Jihyoung grabbed Taesu's feet. Taesu finally got annoyed at Jihyoung and smashed down on him with his crystal-covered fists. He pounded on Jihyoung's body. Wanting to end the pain, Jihyoung grabbed hold of a large crystal just in front of his chest and pulled himself toward it, impaling himself on the throat. Before he died, his mind flashed to the memory of his mother. But his regenerative ability kicked in once again, and he was left gasping for air while his throat healed from the spike's damage. Now the school bully had sealed him with crystals in the darkness of the earth. Lying down in his probably very priceless crystal coffin, Jihyoung came to a miserable conclusion. He was so utterly powerless. However, he gritted his teeth and realized that this is how his mom probably felt right now. They both couldn't move and were stuck in their own bodies. Jihyoung gritted his teeth once more and punched upward. He would get out. It all didn't matter. He would get out alive. Jihyoung continued punching upward, gritting through his injuries and through his painful regenerative ability. A long time later, the mountains on the outskirts of the city were still as peaceful as ever. Meanwhile, the television in the city broadcast an interview with some famous S-rank hunters. The interviewer even complimented his three guests, who were famous for their kindness and volunteer work. The guests explained that they just felt joy whenever they helped out those in need, and they still felt that way. These three guests, Jihyoung's former bullies, had now graduated and were working as S-class hunters, the best of the best. As for the next question, the interviewer asked them about an incident in their past when they hurt a civilian 5 years ago because of an ability outrage. The leader of the three hunters, Taesu, who held his head in grief as tears started flowing down his cheeks. He narrated how, when they were still students, he couldn't control his abilities well, so he accidentally hurt his friend's mom. He apologized to his friend, but couldn't reach him since then. He was about to apologize again in front of the camera when the door to the interviewing area suddenly got blown in, rocketing toward the hunters. Thankfully, Taesu managed to deflect the door with his arms, now reinforced with crystals. The audience watching the interview scattered and shouted as a monster silhouette appeared standing by the broken entrance. With every step of the monster, the floor cracked. Taesu warily watched the imposing figure approaching them when, in an instant, a fist suddenly flew toward his face. In a flashback, we once again see Jihyoung in his crystal coffin, relentlessly and undyingly punching the crystal wall above him. He had no idea how much time had passed. Was it a few months or a few years? He would never know. The crystals before him didn't even show a scratch from all his punches, but there was one thing he noticed. His regenerative ability was different from others. The continued injuries triggered excessive regeneration, and he regenerated into a stronger person than before. Looking at his knuckles, he could see bones peeking through them. His exoskeleton was starting to come out. Inside that grave for 5 years, Jihyoung's whole body struggled. He used his feet, his back, and even his head, For 5 years, he destroyed his entire body and regenerated. He only felt pain. His blood splattered, his flesh ripped, and his bones broke. Pain was his whole life. And when he regenerated, the pain was worse than death. And yet, Jihyoung continued on for 5 years, until a crack formed. Back in the present, Taisu's face gets bloody as Jihyoung lands a heavy skeletal fist, flinging him back into the wall, crashing into it. His two sidekicks, Thor and Sandman, couldn't fathom what just happened and who this person was standing before them. A person looking more like a demon than a human, with an exoskeleton all over him, and even half his face masked with a skull. Jihyoung recalls the last words these bullies told him 5 years ago, when they said he could try murdering them once he escaped his crystal prison. Well, now Jihyoung's rage is still as fresh as ever, and he warns them that he finally got out. However, for the bullies, they couldn't even remember this last interaction with Jihyoung, let alone connect their weak classmate from the past to this imposing monster before them now. They puzzlingly stare at one another as Taesu gets back up behind them. He orders them to murder the guy, so Thor quickly summons a flash of lightning to strike their enemy. The resulting bolt of electricity causes a massive explosion of power and debris, but Jihyoung manages to endure the attack. Lightning still crackles all over his body, but he grins through it and charges. Jihyoung lunges at Thor with his fists, using the blade-like bone protruding from his forearm to spear through Thor. The sharp weapon cuts through Thor's neck, and his decapitated head flies through the air, still showing his shocked expression. Taesu and Sandman are stunned by the shocking turn of events and can't even move as their friend's blood splatters over them. A few seconds later, after Thor's body hits the ground, Sandman finally manages to react and sends his power at Jihyoung. Pieces of rock, sand, and dirt converge and wrap around Jihyoung, imprisoning and crushing him in a ball of earth. Inside his earthly prison, Jihyoung grits his teeth once more and counterattacks. His prison explodes into a million tiny pieces, and in an instant, his hands now hold Sandman right by the jaw, popping the bubble gum he'd seemingly been chewing for 5 years already. Sandman's mind goes into alarm at what's about to happen next as Jihyoung tears off his jaw. Sandman falls to the ground, clutching his brutalized face while Jihyoung lifts his sword arm to put him out of his misery. The blade slams into Sandman, finally ending his suffering. But Taesu is now behind Jihyoung, fists ready to strike. Jihyoung turns around to face him, but this only allows Taesu's crystal-laden fist to crash into his face. Unlike before, the skull encasing Jihyoung's face manages to pierce through Taesu's defenses, and his crystal fists now have cracks running through them. Seeing this, Taesu lifts his hand, and countless crystal spears appear again. Unlike when they were kids, when the spears only surrounded Jihyoung, this time the spears are so large and numerous that they encircle the entire building. Taesu brings down his finger, and the innumerable spears come crashing down, turning Jihyoung into a human pincushion once more. Taesu stares at Jihyoung's mangled corpse, but to his horror, the spikes spearing through Jihyoung's body begin to shake as Jihyoung tries to stand again. Blood is pouring and dripping from all his wounds, but this only makes Jihyoung that much more menacing to look at. Not only does he now resemble a skeletal demon, but now he's bathed in blood and glaring menacingly at Taesu. Now Taesu realizes that this isn't over yet and encases his entire body in protective crystal armor, his fists turning into heavy crystal sledgehammers. He brings his sledgehammers to bear and starts pummeling Jihyoung. With every punch, both bones and crystals crack and blood splatters everywhere. He unleashes a combo on Jihyoung, ending it with a devastating blow to the head. However, just like back then when they were teenagers, Jihyoung once again catches his fist with his mouth. Jihyoung bites down on the fist, and unlike before, when Jihyoung's teeth shattered, this time it is Taesu's arm that shatters. Horrified, Taesu realizes he is no longer invulnerable to this monster. Jihyoung bites down hard on the arm and quickly thrusts his skeletal sword through Taesu's chest. Taesu can't move away since Jihyoung is still biting his fist, and he can only scream in pain from both attacks. In a desperate attempt to escape, Taesu touches the floor and summons a large spire of crystal to sprout and spear through Jihyoung, dragging him into the air. But Jihyoung's bite on his arm is still so strong that Taesu is forced to cut off his own arm. Holding his now missing arm, Taesu hobbles away from the scene. Unfortunately for him, a crystal spike suddenly spears through him, forcing him to crash to the ground. Jihyoung had thrown one of his own spears at him. Jihyoung menacingly walks toward him, while Taesu screams at the top of his lungs for him to stop. Of course, Jihyoung's pace doesn't slow, and he stabs the myriad crystal spikes Taesu had created back into him. Taesu now looks like a pincushion, and he weakly asks the monster before him who he is. In response, Jihyoung takes hold of the skull covering half his face and painfully peels it off. Taesu can finally see Jihyoung's entire face, and his mind immediately recalls who this person is, the weakling they tortured as students, the one they relentlessly called Worm. Half of his face may now be scarred underneath the skull mask, but this person is clearly Worm. Jihyoung doesn't respond to the insult, but instead lifts his fist and strikes Taesu once more. He then grabs him by the throat and rams his skeletal sword through Taesu's mouth and out the back of his head. Jihyoung watches as the life slowly fades from Taesu's eyes. After finally exacting his revenge, the rage seeps out of Jihyoung, and he tiredly stands up. He surveys his surroundings and sees the 3 brutalized corpses of his former bullies lying in pools of their own blood. The whole auditorium is destroyed from their fight, and Jihyoung is the only one left alive in the entire building. The only movement he sees is his own reflection in the pools of blood. Above him, a gray sky peeks through the ruins of the building, and a torrent of rain begins. Jihyoung falls to his knees, looks up at the rain, and feels the water running over him. He releases a blood-curdling scream and starts to cry. After 5 years of nothing but mindless pain, he doesn't know what he'll do next anymore. A little while later, Jihyoung is now sitting in the hospital with a warm blanket covering him. He was staring at the prone figure lying on the hospital bed, and he couldn't believe that his mom was still alive. Somewhere under a clear blue sky, in the middle of a forest, there flickers a gate to another world. Inside this portal is a dark green cave, where a group of hunters is just finishing up from hunting monsters. The 4 guys commend the girl in their group since it was her first time going that deep through the gate, and yet she still contributed a lot to the team. The girl bashfully thanks her comrades for looking out for her, but she becomes horrified when she notices that the 4 men are now encircling her, with an evil and hard glint in their eyes. The guys smirk and tell her they are far more grateful for her accompanying them, reminding her that no one knows what happens inside the gate. The girl shakes in terror, but the muscular guy restrains her hands and caresses her face. He tells her that it would take a month for them to get out of there, and he's very excited to spend that month with her. The muscular guy was about to lick her face when, all of a sudden, his head flew off and rolled to the ground. The others are horrified at the sudden attack, and they look around to find where and who attacked them. Meanwhile, the girl is stunned upon seeing that her savior is a humanoid monster, encased entirely in an exoskeleton. Living up to their names and profession as hunters, the 3 male fighters quickly respond to the presence of another monster and bombard him with attacks. One of them summons multiple fireballs, another creates a spear of darkness, while the samurai brandishes his katana. The fire and dark mage's attacks violently strike Jihyoung, but they barely scratch his exoskeleton. The samurai also attacks and stabs his katana into Jihyoung's chest, but to his horror, the katana just breaks. Jihyoung counterattacks in a flash, and the samurai is destroyed. The remaining 2 male hunters are horrified at this sudden turn of events. They can't even fathom how such a strong monster like this exists in the gate. Meanwhile, Jihyoung lazily swipes his sword through the 2 men, decapitating them, leaving only the girl. The girl is shaking and crying in fright in front of the monster. However, the monster just stares at her. She wipes away her tears and thanks the monster for saving her, but her gratitude abruptly stops as her head is sliced off from her body. Jihyoung had attacked one last time. Why did he do this? Well, to answer that question, we have to go back to a few days ago. Jihyoung was still crying in the auditorium before the people he murdered, when someone suddenly spoke from afar. The voice tells him that what he did was amazing and asks how he feels now that he has gotten his revenge. The voice was coming from a blonde-haired woman standing by the door. He asks the woman who she is, and she introduces herself as Sim Jaein, South Korea's Hunter Association head. Jihyoung asks her how she knows about him, and what she says shocks him. She had been watching him ever since the incident 5 years ago. He realizes that she must be talking about his mother, and his rage suddenly bursts forth once more. The auditorium explodes as he charges at Jaein. He was about to skewer her, but she just unflinchingly tells him that she can save his mother. These words stop Jihyoung's fist just before he hits her, and the shock wave of his attack sends debris and rocks exploding through the corridor. Jihyoung asks her what her words meant, so she clarifies that she can wake up his comatose mother. After all, she is the only S-rank healer in the world. Jihyoung, having learned from his mistakes, asks her how he can be sure she can be trusted. Jane gives a mirthless laugh and informs him that she was the one keeping his mother alive while he was stuck underground for 5 years. Thinking it over, Jihyoung asks her what she wants with him. She smiles and tells him that there is currently a problem with the world situation. The hunters that have sprouted all over different countries are now too strong. Most military forces are no match for hunters, and there are even hunters stronger than nuclear forces. Thanks to these strong hunters, the monsters inside the gates have mostly been eradicated. However, the gates still haven't disappeared. The gates, now without monsters, are being used as pathways by different countries. Nations are using them to fight wars, and the soldiers for these wars are the hunters. Unfortunately for South Korea, they don't have enough hunters. They couldn't stop the Japanese hunters from invading. That is, until Jihyoung appeared. If South Korea were to respond to Japan with their own hunters, it would become total war. But a monster attacking hunters shouldn't be a problem. That is why Jae-in is asking Jihyoung to be their monster, all in exchange for saving his mother. Back inside the gate, the group of hunters that Jihyoung just got rid of were the first of his Japanese victims. It was a beautiful summer day in Japan. However, something was brewing inside a particular glass building, the Prime Minister's official residence. Inside, the Prime Minister of Japan had summoned the Minister of Defense to ask him some questions. The old man has his hands clasped before him and calmly asks the Minister of Defense if there are strong monsters inside the gates. When the Minister of Defense answers in the negative, the Prime Minister then asks him if there are strong hunters in South Korea. The Minister of Defense replies no once again. The Prime Minister suddenly slams his fist on the table and demands to know why their hunters haven't taken over the Korean peninsula if there are no monsters or Korean hunters standing in their way. The veins on his bald head bulge in irritation as he demands an answer from his subordinate. This old, menacing-looking man is Yudo Ryuzaki, the man leading the country of Japan as its prime minister. The Minister of Defense apologizes to his superior and promises to rectify the issue. When Prime Minister Yudo Ryuzaki asks how he plans to rectify it, the Minister of Defense smiles and declares that he himself will take care of it. This young man is Japan's #1 hunter and Minister of Defense, Kakeru Idasai. With his simple cape, gold bracers, and one singular earring, Kakeru Idasai doesn't look like the dangerous hunter that he actually is. A singular lock of white hair in the shape of the moon is also prominently displayed above the rest of his dark hair, glued to his style and technique. After his meeting, Defense Minister Kakeru Idasai orders his secretary to prepare his sword. He will go alone inside the gates. His secretary nervously remarks that the hunters they sent inside the gates were all lost, so it would be wise for him to go along with the others. However, Kakeru Idasai stops walking and asks her if he looks like the person who would need something like that. Sensing his dangerous aura, the secretary quickly apologizes and prepares a sword. A few hours later, they pass through the gate in Japan's countryside and are now in the lands beyond. He is walking through the cave where the other Japanese hunters went missing and wonders what could have happened to his useless subordinates. Numerous weak and small monsters attack him, but he just passes through them, cutting them to ribbons with his sword. He knows that his subordinate hunters couldn't have died against weak monsters like those. While wondering what could possibly be inside the cave, he finally gets to the end. Inside, the Japanese hunters' bloody corpses are all piled up on one another, and sitting on top of them is a humanoid skeletal monster. Fury envelopes Kakeru Idasai, and in one quick motion, he draws his sword from its sheath and strikes at the monster. To his utter surprise, his sword is stopped by the monster's own skeletal sword, attached to its hand and armored forearm. Kakeru Idasai is insulted that this measly monster dares to block his sword, and he fluidly dodges the monster's counterattack. He counterattacks by punching the monster's chest, creating some distance between them, and prepares his sword for one of his techniques. In one continuous motion, he utilizes one of his skills, Kakeru Idasai First Moon, and slices at the monster. Despite managing to block it, the monster is blown back by the strength of the attack and coughs up blood. Kakeru Idasai isn't finished yet, and releases his second technique, Second Moon. Pure energy released by his sword directly impacts the skeletal monster, blowing it once again into the cave wall. Kakeru Idasai compliments the monster's sturdiness for still being in one piece, and he uses his third technique, Third Moon, to slash at the monster by the wall. This time, the monster manages to dodge his sword and attacks with its own. The skeletal sword is about to hit Kakeru Idasai on the neck and decapitate him when he nonchalantly reverses the direction of his katana and chops off the monster's arm. The skeletal monster's exoskeleton might be sturdy, but he tells it that his katana can slice even through diamonds. With that, he decapitates the skeletal monster, which falls to the ground. Kakeru Itasai sheathes his sword while wondering how the elite hunters of his country lost to something like this. He is about to walk away, leaving Jihyoung's body and decapitated head on the cave floor. Jihyoung's eyes are blank, as if he were genuinely dead, but inside, his mind is remembering his childhood, especially his dad. His dad was always busy because of work, but he was a very warm and friendly man. Jihyoung had always liked that about him. One day, he and his mom happily welcomed his dad, who was just coming home from work with a box of fried chicken. Jihyoung ran across the street to hug his father, not noticing the incoming truck. His dad dropped the chicken and came running towards him too. The last thing he saw of his father alive was him pushing Jihyoung back, the truck's headlights bathing his father in light. His dad passed away because of him. With his death, his business went under, and Jihyoung and his mom ended up with a huge debt. His mom's soft hands became rough from scrubbing dishes and doing work in their dwindling restaurant. When he asked his mom if she was okay, his mom always just kindly smiled at him and assured him that she was fine. But every night, Jihyoung knew the truth. He couldn't sleep, and tears fell from his eyes because he could hear his mom silently crying beside him. His mom was crying, and it was all because of him. Days later, he realized that someone like him shouldn't live anymore. His shaking hands held the box cutter. A few minutes later, his mom was bringing him dinner when she abruptly dropped the tray upon seeing what her son was doing. Jihyoung was crying, but smiling as he held his injured hand before him. He happily tells his mom that he might be an awakened. His wrist slowly heals, and the TV blares about an interview with Korea's #1 hunter named Jihyoung. Jihyoung hugs his mom and declares that just like the guy on TV, he'll become a hunter and make them rich and happy. But that's not what happened. Years later, his mom is now in a coma in the hospital. This memory brings life back into Jihyoung's eyes. He also recalls his conversation with Sim Jaein, where she told him that the world's balance is already broken. Many nations have already been conquered by hunters. Currently, their biggest enemy is Japan. That's why they wanted him to become their country's monster and hunt Japan's strongest hunters. While he had just fought with one of Japan's strongest hunters, Kakeru Itasai was trying to think of what his next move would be. Kakeru Itasai mindlessly realizes that he used up too much time with the skeletal monster. It looks like he will have to go to South Korea himself and capture the country. Meanwhile, he doesn't notice that Jihyoung's decapitated head is slowly moving behind him and crawling toward him. He only finds out when Jihyoung suddenly bites through his leg, surprising him. Looking at the head attacking him, Kakeru Itasai can see a new skeleton growing out of the head, and he realizes that his enemy must have regeneration. This doesn't make sense though, since he had already cut off the head. Meanwhile, Jihyoung continues to chomp down on Kakeru Itasai's leg, eliciting a painful scream. Kakeru Itasai slices Jihyoung's face, escaping his bite, and finally takes Jihyoung seriously. A moon forms on Kakeru Itasai's forehead. His eyes light up like lightning, and moonlight reflects through his sword. The symbol of his technique illuminates the very ground they are standing on, and in an instant, Kakeru Itasai vanishes. Jihyoung can only sense flickers of Kakeru Itasai running all around him. Kakeru Itasai then activates his most powerful attack, Kakeru Itasai Fatal 12th Moon, and the numerous silhouettes of Kakeru Itasai simultaneously attack Jihyoung. Jihyoung couldn't even react as his whole body gets minced by Kakeru Itasai's katana. The pressure and waves created by his technique are so powerful that the slashes travel and reverberate throughout the tunnel and into the gate. The slashes escape the gate back to Earth, and the whole forest mountainside is laid waste by the attack. On the other side of the gate, inside the cave, the roof is carved in moonlight patterns, and the floor is diced. Meanwhile, Kakeru Itasai shakily walks away from his devastating attack, still enduring the injury to his ankle. He realizes that he might need healing when all of a sudden, a spike of bone hits his other leg. He nervously laughs while behind him, the skeletal hand from which the bone spike erupted is shakily pointing toward him. Attached to the skeletal hand is a battered, yet menacing-looking skeleton still trying to crawl toward him. Kakeru Itasai shakes from the attack and the realization that Jihyoung is still regenerating. He cannot believe that Jihyoung is still trying to fight despite the large difference in strength between them. He grips his katana once more and charges at Jihyoung with a shout. A few days later, the gate in the countryside of Japan is surrounded by numerous hunters. The Ministry of Defense's elite hunters are all there, and at the front, with his arms crossed, is Japan's Prime Minister himself, Yudo Ryuzaki. Beside him, Kakeru Itasai's secretary asks the Prime Minister if they really need that much firepower. Prime Minister Yudo Ryuzaki replies that it has been 3 days since Kakeru Itasai went in. Since he still hasn't returned, they need to check on him. After all, Kakeru Itasai is still Japan's #1 hunter. All of a sudden, his speech is interrupted when a head rolls out of the gate. It is Kakeru Itasai's head. Then, a skeletal monster walks out of the gate and into Japan itself. Yuto Ryuzaki is shocked at this sudden turn of events, but his head abruptly flies off, detached from his body. Meanwhile, back in South Korea, a conversation is also being held at the Korean Hunter Association headquarters. A subordinate is telling Sim Jae-in that since Jung-gang's son is involved, it would be bad if he found out. And yet, is that a good enough reason to send Jihyoung to Japan? Sim Jae-in smiles and replies to her subordinate. Aren't you even remotely curious who would win, the ever-regenerating Jihyoung or Japan's strongest hunter? In Japan, Prime Minister Yuto Ryozaki's head abruptly reattaches itself to his body, and his flaming fist suddenly punches Jihyoung to the ground. The punch causes an explosion so large that it seems a meteor has fallen right on the two combatants. Jihyoung is now unconscious on the ground, with Yuto Ryuzaki standing over him, lava dripping out of his fists and burning holes throughout his clothes. After all, Yuto Ryuzaki is not just the Prime Minister of Japan. He is also an S-rank hunter in Japan's #0. His bald head is flaming in anger, while the cut on his neck has already miraculously healed, thanks to the magma-like nature of his body. Meanwhile, Jihyoung lies before him, defeated and stunned by Minister Yuto Ryozaki's singular but powerful attack. Before we dive back into this heated battle, let's take a quick step back in time. Almost 3 years ago, most of the monsters from the gates were subjugated, and the only powerful entities left in the world were the very hunters who saved the world. People around the globe started fearing the power of the hunters. A few countries tried to eradicate the hunters, but that didn't go as planned for obvious reasons. The hunters around the world struck deals with their nations to coexist, or they conquered them outright. This is how each country found its own way to gain supremacy. Japan was one of the countries that fell to a hunter, and the reason was straightforward: the Prime Minister, who happens to be a triple S-rank hunter. He was aggressive even before he awakened, and once the hunter system appeared, he set his sights on taking control of South Korea as well. But his plans hit a snag as soon as our boy stepped up. Even after taking that devastating punch, Jihyoung regenerates back to his former self as he stands up once again. The hunters who came with the Prime Minister quickly launch themselves at him. One of them swings his weapon, trying to behead him, but instead ends up getting beheaded himself. Another hunter finds his face crushed in the process. The Prime Minister and his goons can only watch in horror as Jihyoung stands in front of them, totally unfazed. They all get angry, and the Prime Minister grows increasingly aggressive, making it clear that anyone who moves from their spot will be killed personally by him. His words hang heavy in the air, leaving everyone stunned in silence as Jihyoung marches forward toward the Prime Minister. The scene transitions to a cold day with snow falling gently. The Prime Minister discovers a young boy out in the streets, shivering and on the verge of freezing. He asks the boy what he's doing out there, but the little one doesn't respond right away. Instead, he looks up at the Prime Minister and asks who he is. In the background, TVs are broadcasting the Prime Minister, but surprisingly, this kid doesn't seem to recognize him at all. That's when Yuto Ryuzaki tells him to come with him because it's too cold outside. Just like that, he takes the boy under his wing. As they walk, Yuto Ryuzaki asks the kid his name, and the boy replies, Kakeru Itasai. This is the same Kakeru Itasai our boy killed in the gate. Seeing the head of his most cherished child absolutely enrages the Prime Minister. In a flash, he delivers a punch that sends Jihyoung flying. But Yuto Ryuzaki isn't done. He follows up with a barrage of punches, each one more devastating than the last, until Jihyoung's head is blown clean off. As Jihyoung falls backward, his brain and head destroyed, Yuto Ryuzaki unleashes a terrifying power that burns and obliterates everything in its path. Jihyoung is reduced to nothing but a pile of bones, and everyone praises the Prime Minister for his stellar performance, which was already expected of him. Yuto Ryuzaki extends his hand to grab the head of his child, but before he can reach it, we see Jihyoung piecing himself back together, even after being obliterated into bones and dust. The Prime Minister's eyes widen in shock, and his mind flashes back to the past. We see countless dead bodies of other hunters, and the one who finished them off is the same kid, Kakeru Itasai. The Prime Minister apologizes for making him do such dirty work, but Kakeru Itasai reassures him that it's all right. He's just glad that Japan is finally in their grasp. That's when the Prime Minister mentions their plan to take over South Korea and China as well. He reminds Kakeru Itasai that he might die next time, and if he doesn't want to fight, he can quit. But Kakeru Itasai quickly reminds him that he was the one who took him in when he was dying in the cold, so he intends to repay that debt for the rest of his life. However, there's one thing he requests from the Prime Minister. He wants to call him father. The Prime Minister calls him close-minded and reminds him that it goes without saying that he is his son. By now, in the present, the atmosphere has become unbearably tense, and the ground beneath everyone's feet turns to lava due to the Prime Minister's uncontrollable anger. One of the hunters, a lady with ice powers, quickly freezes the ground because she does not want to get incinerated by the scorching lava. She shouts out to the Prime Minister, who's completely lost control. He no longer resembles a human. Instead, he looks more like a terrifying creature made of fire, melting everything around him as if it were butter. But Jihyoung is as cool as a cucumber, and he begins to take confident steps forward. The mountain becomes a volcano on the verge of erupting, and as we speak, it erupts right away. The Prime Minister has fully transformed into an abomination, a being of pure magma, ready to melt everything and everyone into ashes. With a single gesture, he unleashes scorching flames that start to incinerate Jihyoung. His flesh disappears, burning away, but he still leaps from the ground toward this bastard. The Prime Minister unleashes even more magma from the ground, and it starts burning away Jihyoung's bones. The whole place descends into chaos as the other hunters retreat in panic, desperate to save their own lives. The sheer heat and destructive power turn the entire mountain into a massive, lava-covered volcano. Finally, Yudo Ryuzuki begins to calm down, silently watching as Jihyoung is swallowed by the volcano he created. But despite being consumed by the lava, Jihyoung's mind is still fixated on reaching Yudo Ryuzuki. The Prime Minister knows this isn't over yet, so he summons Haname, the ice-powered lady. She promptly appears, removes her glove, and begins cooling the surface of the lava, forming a solid layer to trap Jihyoung beneath it. As the surface hardens, Yudo Ryuzuki bids a final farewell to Jihyoung, telling him to melt forever underneath the lava. The scene then transitions to South Korea, at the Kwemkong Guild. There, we see a lady trying her hardest to heal a particular hunter. This hunter is the same guy who messed with Jihyoung's mother and ended up getting his ass wiped out. But it looks like he hasn't kicked the bucket just yet. Things on the mountain have finally started to calm down, and the Prime Minister tells his hunters that only the highest-ranked ones will stay, while the rest must return. Everyone agrees, and meanwhile, we see Jihyoung's hand pushing through the solidified layer of molten lava, violently moving around. He's thinking to himself about how these fools are messing with lava like it's a big deal, when to him, it's just a tickle. Inside a blood gate, he experienced heat tens of thousands of times more intense. If you're not aware of these red gates, I will remind you that the creators of this comic actually changed his abilities in the new serialization of the comic. In this version, he gets stuck inside the blood gate, where he goes through torture and stuff by the monsters in the gate. Personally, I preferred the old origin story for his powers. What do you think? Which version did you like the best? Let me know in the comments. Though this fire is nothing to him, the pain is still unbearable as always, but he has to go through this regardless. Eventually, Jihyoung breaks through the tough ceiling of dried lava, leaving Haname completely boggled. She can't believe her eyes as he literally crawls his way out from the depths of hell. The Prime Minister is sure by now that things are about to get real, so he tells Haname to gather the other hunters and find somewhere safe to hide. She glances back at Jihyoung and can understand why the Prime Minister is sweating bullets. Then the Prime Minister jumps down into the volcano itself, landing right beside Jihyoung. The scene then transitions to the past in Japan, where Haname is asking him why he is overexerting himself, reminding him that magma regeneration is not omnipotent. The Prime Minister responds by telling her that among the 4 great hunter nations, USA, China, Russia, and Japan, Japan is the weakest. He fears that if they can't absorb South Korea, Japan might not survive. Haname hugs his muscular arm tightly, trying to comfort him. She reminds him that many of their hunters will die in the process, but the Prime Minister makes it clear that he'll fight himself if he has to. He's ready to sacrifice his own body if it means protecting his country. With that determination in mind, the Prime Minister punches the ground so hard that Jihyoung is thrown back by the sheer force. He then quickly charges his fist with immense power and delivers a punch so massive that Jihyoung is sent crashing into the volcano wall, shattering it in the process. Yudo Ryuzuki doesn't let up, continuing his relentless barrage. As Jihyoung is thrown around, he regains his balance, but the Prime Minister throws yet another massive wave of fire at him. The flames hit their mark, severing Jihyoung's hands and flinging his body away. The Prime Minister doesn't stop there. He leaps into the air and comes crashing down like a goddamn meteor, causing the entire mountain to shake with his godlike impact. Meanwhile, Hanem reaches the other hunters and urgently reports that the Prime Minister has ordered an evacuation. Despite the danger, she declares that she will remain behind to support him, but the other hunters refuse to follow her command. They apologize to her and insist that they won't abandon the Prime Minister. They owe him too much for the help he's given them, and they are prepared to lay down their lives to protect him until the very end. It's then that they address her as the Prime Minister's wife. On a side note, it's probably a good thing they updated the Prime Minister's appearance from a jacked-up old man to a younger version, because the idea of him having a wife who could pass as his daughter would have been pretty awkward. Back in the heart of the volcano, the battle rages on. Yudo Ryuzaki is relentlessly pushing Jihyoung deeper and deeper into the molten depths. At one point, Jihyoung's entire body is incinerated, reduced to nothing. But as you might expect, he begins to reform again, and soon he's crawling his way out of the volcano once more. Jihyoung suddenly leaps toward Hanem, which leaves the Prime Minister absolutely fuming. Jihyoung, on the other hand, grabs her freezing hand, and he immediately begins to freeze as well. But despite that, he drags her down into the volcano with him. The other hunters quickly jump into the volcano to join the fray. Yudo Ryuzaki does not waste his time either and prepares a devastating counterattack. In the blink of an eye, he slashes off Jihyoung's arm and pulls his wife close, trying to protect her. But Jihyoung manages to slice off Yudo Ryuzaki's head in the process. The head begins to fall, though it remains connected to the body through Yudo Ryuzaki's magma powers. But Jihyoung does not let this golden opportunity slip. He grabs Haneme's hand, the one with the ability to freeze anything by touch, and forces her to touch her husband's head. Before we see Yudo Ryuzaki's head freeze, Jihyoung finds himself shattered into pieces by the other hunters, his body broken and his head falling away. The other hunters ask Hanem if she is okay, but her mind is occupied with thoughts of her husband's well-being. She starts to tear up when she realizes that she has frozen her own husband's head before it could reattach to his body. To hit the last nail on the coffin, Jihyoung steps on that ugly head, shattering it into pieces. A wave of despair washes over the hunters as they realize that this monster is still alive. In the next moment, he dashes forward with incredible speed, slashing through everything in his path, leaving Hanem in tears as she watches her comrades dropping down like dead flocks of birds. Now, it's finally her turn to lose her head. In her final moments, her eyes begin to close, and she senses her head falling away. In that instant, memories flood back, and she gets flashbacks of the time she spent with her husband, moments filled with joy and love. But as her head falls, those pleasant memories twist into horror, marking the loss of everything she held dear. With her consciousness fading, she reaches out to touch her own head, and at that very moment, she freezes herself entirely, a tragic end to her beautiful life shared with her husband. Limbs are scattered everywhere, and there is no one left alive except for our boy. He finally climbs out of the volcano and decides it's time to head back to Korea. The scene then transitions to South Korea, at Kyumkong Guild, inside the Mana Stone storage room. There we find Taesu, that same sucker we love to hate, pushing himself hard to get stronger. A lady, whose name I don't know, warns him not to overdo it, reminding him that he was the only one with mana left, which is why he barely survived while his friends are already pushing up daisies. Taesu acknowledges the harsh truth. He admits that he remembers everything clearly. More than that, he recalls how the brat he used to bully back in school escaped the Blood Gate and killed him and his friends. It seems they've changed Taesu's powers too. The stones he's conjuring up, which used to be blue, now radiate a red color. We then learn that he is the guild master of Kyumkong Guild, an S-rank hunter known as Han Taesu, fueled by revenge against Jihyoung. He instructs the lady to release the seal that's been holding him back. A while later, we see her totally exhausted, panting heavily as she tries to catch her breath. But despite her fatigue, she delivers the good news that the seal has been broken and he is now free to unleash his terrifying powers. Taesu commands her to assemble the members of the guild immediately. Once they gather in the assembly hall, he stands on the stage and everyone bows their heads in respect. They express their disbelief that he had been presumed dead, but now that he's alive, they're eager to follow his every order. The head of Kyumkang's intelligence team, an S-rank hunter named Han Kyungshin, reports to his master that Jihyoung has moved to the gate following the massacre in Japan. Before Kyungshin can say more, Taesu grows impatient and simply orders them to kill that bastard. Kyungshin acknowledges the command, swearing on their lives that the entire intelligence team will carry out the order. But just as he finishes his pledge, Taesu chops off Kyungchin's head, leaving the other members stunned in their tracks. As he holds the chopped-off head of his junior, we learn that Taesu has already absorbed the Korea Hunter Association 3 years ago. Taesu then kills another guy by twisting his limbs apart, and the body explodes, showering blood everywhere. The scene transitions to the past, where a girl asks him if removing the seal is necessary since his ability is cursed. We all know his answer pretty well. In the present moment, he starts killing everyone in sight, and it's one hell of a massacre. The members of the guild run for their lives, but it's all in vain. Taesu literally kills all 528 members of the guild and absorbs their powers into himself. He's going crazy as he absorbs this overwhelming energy, while the lady just sinks into despair, asking why he has to do this. That's when Taesu reminds her that Jihyoung killed the SSS-rank prime minister, so he's sure that even after absorbing all these hunters, it still won't be enough to fight him. He's determined to kill Jihyoung at all costs and is planning to go to Russia to gain even more power. The scene then transitions to a port where we see a girl waiting for him, who promptly welcomes Jihyoung as he steps out of the gate. Next, the scene cuts to the hospital where Jihyoung's mother is. We learn that she has started the procedure to heal his mother. She uses her S-rank healing ability to restore damaged cells one by one, channeling her mana into the process. She performs this procedure every day since it consumes a lot of mana, so it's going to take some time. But she's confident that she can save his mother. Once she finishes her usual healing session and steps out of the ward, she mentions that if she keeps this up every day, his mother will wake up by next week. She then plops down to the ground from extreme exhaustion, and Jihyoung can tell that this is costing her an extraordinary amount of mana. He's curious about why she's putting her health on the line for this. She grabs his hand as she is sweating profusely and insists that he has to survive. At that moment, green energy begins to shimmer as she holds his hand, but Jihyoung quickly yanks his hand out of her grasp. On the other hand, the girl seems to figure something out, which is that Jihyoung's beastification has progressed significantly within the Blood Gate. She reveals that ever since the gate first appeared 15 years ago, all other gates have slowly turned into Blood Gates. Since Jihyoung escaped one of the red Blood Gates, the change started to accelerate. As a result, all the gates worldwide are turning into Blood Gates, and the mana flowing from them is giving him strength. In terms of mana flow, if a regular gate is a hole, then a Blood Gate is a passage connected to somewhere, and something is coming through it. That something is looking for Jihyoung. Terrifying creatures start popping out of those red gates, and everything descends into chaos as everyone begins to lose their minds. It's just a massacre everywhere. The scene then shifts to the office of the president of South Korea, where the entire presidential building is covered by a shield. Inside, the president is freaking out, demanding to know why the Kyungkong Guild isn't answering them. The assistant beside him grimly explains that the guild has been annihilated. The president gasps in disbelief, asking why. The assistant admits he's not sure. He then asks the president if they should request help from overseas, but the president shoots that down, saying it would be like inviting self-destruction. He instructs his assistant to declare martial law first, but the assistant replies that the military can't do anything against those monsters. The president reminds him that it's still better than doing nothing, especially since Kyungkong Guild was not the only ace up their sleeve. He explains that they have other hunters too, and they belong to Korea's second-ranking guild, Dosa Guild. The first A-ranker is John Woo-jin, and the lady beside him is Kong Si-hee, who's also an A-rank. Then there's Korea's third-ranking guild known as Vinyl Guild. Their top A-ranker is a guy called Vinyl Man, while the lady is a shooter known as Superwoman. As for Korea's fourth-ranking guild, that's the Yonghak Guild. They have an A-ranker named Yonghak and another A-ranker named Nam Junyoung. As we speak, these hunters are already working together to fend off the terrifying monsters coming through the gates. But it looks like I wasted my breath introducing this bunch of nobodies for no reason, because these idiots have already been defeated, crushed by just the palm of the monster's hand. We also see our boy there, and he asks the girl, since these monsters are appearing because of him, does that mean the deaths of these hunters are on him too? She just looks at him and asks what he intends to do about it. At that moment, we spot a girl on the road about to get crushed by a giant monster's palm, just like everyone else. But as expected, our guy literally slices that monster in half and saves the girl, the damsel in distress, right away. It looks like the S-rank healer now has her answer to the question she asked him about what he intends to do. Jihyoung then reveals that when he died inside the Blood Gate, the gate's mana tried to turn him into a monster. He barely endured it and ended up with an abnormal regeneration ability, or so he thought. It turns out he did not get any regeneration abilities, but the mana just won't let him die until he becomes a complete monster himself. He clenches his jaw in frustration as he recalls how he's finally trying to live a peaceful life after taking care of his mother. But now these monsters have started to meddle in his life. He grabs one of the monsters and tears it to shreds. As he's ripping the monster apart, we enter the place where all the red gates are connected. Inside, we hear a voice asking if this boy is the one who caused the crack. This curious voice belongs to a terrifying undead creature with nothing but bones and no flesh. As Jihyoung continues battling the monsters emerging from the gate, he reflects on how familiar they seem. These are the same creatures he fought endlessly for 5 years inside the Blood Gate. He knows that there's a limit to how many monsters come through a gate, and that eventually the activity will stop. Confident after clearing out the immediate vicinity of monsters, he believes that if he keeps this up, he'll be able to finally live peacefully with his mother. But in an unexpected twist, a bullet suddenly pierces his head. Confused and alarmed, Jihyoung turns to find army tanks and soldiers aiming their weapons at him. One soldier, unsure of their actions, asks his company commander if they should be doing this, noting that Jihyoung hasn't harmed any humans, only the monsters. The commander, however, insists that it doesn't matter. To him, Jihyoung is the root cause of the disaster, and they must subdue him until reinforcements from the Hunter Association arrive. As Jihyoung looks at the soldiers in bewilderment, they begin to open fire on him. Bullets and tank shells bombard his body, inflicting multiple injuries. A short time later, Jihyoung finds himself standing among the corpses of the soldiers who attacked him. As Jihyoung stands amidst the corpses of soldiers killed by him, he recalls a crucial warning from Jan. She had told him to be cautious, as suppressing the process of monsterification would be increasingly difficult now that a blood gate had opened. He then sensing something important about the situation, though it remains unclear what exactly he realizes. The scene then shifts to Jihyoung's past, bringing forth painful memories from his time as a bullied student. One day after school, a friend, noticing the constant harassment Jihyoung endured, approached him and asked, "Why do they only pick on him? Han Tae-soo and other bastards?" Jihyoung's response was resigned. "Because he is easy. He'll get hurt too. Just pretend he doesn't know him at school." Frustrated and angered by Jihyoung's acceptance of the bullying, the friend grabbed him by the collar, shouting, "Is he out of his mind?" After seeing the state of Jihyoung's face, battered from the bullying, his friend, overwhelmed with anger, stormed off, cursing and telling Jihyoung to just fuck off. At the time, Jihyoung believed his friend had abandoned him. But in reality, his friend had been quietly gathering evidence of the bullying. Using his right eye, which had special abilities, he recorded everything. Once he had enough evidence, he sent it to the police, the education office, and various news outlets in a brave attempt to expose the truth. Tragically, the very next day, Jihyoung's friend was found with his right eye gruesomely extracted. Jihyoung visits his friend, who apologizes, saying he can't continue going to school with him anymore. Sensing that Han Tae-soo is behind the incident, Jihyoung becomes angry and promises to avenge his friend. However, his friend grows nervous, sweating as he urges Jihyoung not to seek revenge. Jihyoung, overwhelmed with emotion, tearfully asks what his friend will do now that he's lost his ability. His friend, trying to console him, responds that life isn't that important and that he'll simply join the army, advising Jihyoung not to worry about him. The memory then shatters into the present as Jihyoung suddenly spots his friend's severed head among the corpses of the fallen soldiers. The shock overwhelms him, and he screams in rage, realizing the tragic fate of his friend. Fueled by anger, he turns to confront the monsters that had come out of the Blood Gate, slaying them in a furious onslaught. But more monsters continue to pour through the gate, forcing Jihyoung into a relentless battle. Meanwhile, the scene shifts to the office of the President of South Korea. The presidential building is under immense pressure as its protective shield, meant to guard against the chaos, begins to crack and break under the growing threat outside. The president sees Jihyoung fighting monsters on the screen and asks his assistant, "What is that?" Assistant explains that Jihyoung is the monster responsible for killing the guild master of the Kyum Kong Guild and Japan's prime minister. After their investigation, they concluded that Jihyoung must be killed to restore the gates to normal. But the president, puzzled by unfolding scene before his eyes, and asked why Jihyoung is fighting the other monsters. The assistant admits they don't know the full reason, but points out that even the other monsters can't kill Jihyoung, and now blood gates have started spreading to other countries. The assistant warns they can't delay any longer. When the president asks about the status of domestic hunters, the assistant reports that they have all been completely annihilated. The president, flustered, instructs the assistant to contact the Foreign Hunter Bureau for help. The scene then shifts to China, where the country's #1 hunter, triple S rank Luan Zhuguang, stands over the corpses of a large number of hunters he has killed. Upon hearing the news about the situation in Korea, he comments the monster who killed the hunters of Korea and Japan caused the floodgates. This will be interesting, and slams his battle axe into the ground, shattering it. Meanwhile, in Russia, Russia's #1 triple S rank hunter, Vladimir Ryazana, watches from his throne as Jihyoung continues his fight. On the battlefield, Stephen Lucas, America's #1 triple S rank hunter, gets the information about Jihyoung, and he stated to his junior that he hears the screams of those in pain, and he need to go. The junior protests, reminding Lucas that if he leaves, the war in Russia will be abandoned, but Lucas dismisses it, stating the war is over. He then unleashed his powers on the assembled Russian hunters, killing them. Well guys, that's the end of the video. If you like this video, comment next part in the comment section. Also, subscribe to the channel, hit the bell, and like the video. Thank you for watching.